They say time heals all wounds, but time didn't heal mine. It only sharpened them, turned them into blades I carried inside my chest. The night I lost everything still lives behind my eyelids. Every time I close them, I can smell the smoke, hear the silence, feel the weight of the world crushing my ribs. It wasn't the kind of pain that fades. It was the kind that grows roots. I remember the way the sky looked that evening, red, like the world was bleeding. I remember my wife's laughter echoing from the porch, my son chasing fireflies in the yard, his tiny hands cupped around light he could never keep. For a moment, everything was perfect. And maybe that's why the universe took it away. Because nothing perfect ever lasts. I'd built that house with my own hands. Every nail, every wall, every piece of it carried my sweat. It wasn't just a home. It was proof that I'd made something in this cruel world. A life, a family, a future. But fate doesn't care how hard you work. It takes what it wants. When it wants. That night, I was late coming home. A small decision. 10 extra minutes at the workshop. One more thing to fix before closing. And those 10 minutes became a lifetime of punishment. By the time I turned onto our street, the sirens had already started. Red lights painted the sky. People stood outside, frozen, watching as fire devoured my world. My house, my life, burned like a candle left in the wind. I ran until my lungs ripped open. Someone tried to stop me. I didn't feel their hands. I only felt the heat, the kind that melts skin and memory. I screamed their names, over and over. But the flames didn't answer. Only the silence did. They told me later it was an electrical fault, a spark in the wires, a cruel coincidence. But I knew better. Somewhere deep down, I felt it. This wasn't chance. It was choice. Someone had done this. And so began the longest night of my life. The night that never really ended. Because even when the sun rose, it didn't bring light. It brought questions, and guilt, and hate. The world moved on, but I stayed behind, trapped in that single moment. A man without purpose, without reason to breathe. I stopped going to work, stopped eating, stopped living. People whispered. They said grief had broken me. They were wrong. Grief didn't break me. It built me into something else. Weeks later, I found myself walking the old road that led out of town. No destination, no plan, just moving because stillness hurt too much. And that's when I met him, the old man. He sat outside a shuttered gas station, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. His face looked carved from stone, his eyes the color of forgotten storms. He didn't ask who I was, didn't offer comfort or pity. He just looked at me, like he already knew everything. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. They took your fire, didn't they? Something in me cracked, because until that moment, I thought my fire was gone. But he was right. They hadn't taken it. They'd just buried it. And under the weight of loss, it had been waiting, smoldering. That old man didn't tell me to forgive. He didn't tell me to move on. He told me to remember, to look into the ashes and see what was still burning. That night, under the pale hum of the gas station sign, I made a promise. Not to the dead, but to myself. I would find whoever did this. I would strip away their peace, their comfort, their laughter, piece by piece, the way they stripped mine. And when they begged for mercy, I'd remind them of what mercy looked like when my world was on fire. I walked away from that gas station a different man. The one who died in the fire had been weak, hopeful, naive. The one who walked into the night carried nothing but rage. And if you ask me now what the old man's 5 words meant, they were a curse and a blessing. Because from that moment, my grief wasn't grief anymore. It was fuel, and I was the flame. Before the fire, my world was small, but it was mine. A quiet town with roads that always smelled of rain and dust. A workshop that sang with the hum of broken engines and second chances. People came to me when things stopped working, and I fixed them. Engines, clocks, radios, anything that ticked, turned, or breathed life through wire and metal. Funny thing though, I could fix everything except people. My wife Emily used to say I had a way of bringing things back to life. Her voice was always soft when she said it. The kind of softness that makes you believe the world might be kind after all. And when she smiled, I believed it. She'd met me when I was nobody. A man with calloused hands, an old truck, and dreams that didn't fit in his wallet. But she didn't care about money. She saw something in me that I didn't even see myself. A spark I'd buried under years of failure. We built our home from nothing. Every evening after work, I'd come home covered in oil and sawdust, and she'd hand me a cup of coffee like it was a medal. Our boy, Liam, would run out barefoot, shouting that I smelled like a robot factory. He was 6, and everything in him was light. He had her eyes, blue like the first sky after a storm. I thought that was enough. A small family, a steady rhythm, a life that finally felt safe. But safety makes you blind. It makes you believe that peace is permanent. And it never is. The first shadow fell quietly. It wore a smile and a handshake. His name was Daniel Clay, a man I'd known since school. We weren't friends back then, just 2 boys chasing different dreams. He became everything I wasn't. Sharp suits, smooth words, a businessman who built an empire on charm and lies. When he came back to town, he said he wanted to invest in me. Said my workshop had potential, that we could grow it into something bigger, a company, maybe even a brand. I remember Emily's excitement when he said it. For her, it wasn't about money. It was about finally seeing me recognized for what I did. She believed in the good in everyone. She believed Daniel was offering help. I believed her. And that was my first mistake. Weeks turned into months. Daniel became a part of our lives. Dinners at our table, late nights at the workshop, papers scattered across my desk. He talked about expansion, investors, opportunity. I talked about loyalty, craftsmanship, and trust. Different languages, but we thought we were speaking the same one. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks. The way his eyes lingered too long on Emily when she laughed. The way he always accidentally showed up when I wasn't home. But when you love someone, you see what you want to see. You hear what you hope to hear. And I hoped too much. The money started flowing. New equipment, new space, new clients. Everything looked brighter. Until it didn't. Bills went missing. Suppliers called about unpaid invoices I never saw. Daniel always had an excuse. Just paperwork delays, he'd say. Trust me. And I did. Because I was too busy fixing machines to notice he was breaking my life. One evening, I came home to find Emily sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. Her coffee was cold. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was a whisper. Maybe Daniel isn't who we think he is. I asked what she meant, but she only shook her head. Something about her had changed. She started spending hours alone, writing letters she never sent. Her smile, once constant, became rare, like sunlight in winter. Then one night, Daniel called me to meet him at the workshop. He said it was urgent. When I arrived, The place was empty. Only a faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. I waited for an hour, but he never came. When I returned home, the street was lined with fire trucks, and everything I'd ever loved was gone. They said it was an accident. I told myself maybe it was. But inside, I knew. The fire hadn't started in the kitchen like they claimed. It started in the garage, the place Daniel had keys to. For weeks, I clung to denial, because the truth was too heavy to carry. But lies are heavier when you wear them too long. When I tried to reach Daniel after the funeral, he was gone. No calls, no trace. The company funds, gone too. The business we'd built together was nothing more than a shell. Everything had been under his name. He'd used me, drained me, and left me to burn. Literally. But betrayal doesn't just come from deceit. It comes from the silence that follows. From realizing that the people you trusted most never saw the knife until it was already in your back. So when the old man asked me that night if they'd taken my fire, I knew what he meant. Because Daniel hadn't just stolen my money, my home, or my family. He'd stolen the man I used to be. And in his place, something darker was born. I spent months wandering through that darkness. The world forgot me. But I didn't forget him. Every night, I saw his face in the flames. Smiling, confident, untouchable. And every night, I whispered the same words before I slept. I will find you, Daniel, and I will make you understand. Because when everything you love turns to ash, you stop fearing the fire. You become it. Grief is a strange thing. At first, it feels endless, like drowning in slow motion. You think it will kill you. But after a while, you realize it isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to change you. For months, I lived in the ruins of my own life. The house had been rebuilt. For someone else. The workshop boarded up. People crossed the street when they saw me coming. The widower. The broken man. The ghost of a story they didn't want to remember. But ghosts don't die. They wait. I stopped sleeping. My nights became a loop of memories and fire. I started visiting the police station, asking questions they didn't want to answer. They said there was no evidence, no suspect, no reason to reopen the case. But I saw the hesitation in their eyes, the way they avoided my gaze. Daniel had money, influence, friends in places that made truth disappear. I realized then that justice wasn't blind. It just looked away when money waved its hand. So I stopped asking, and I started watching. I left town, sold what little I had left, traveled city to city, following rumors, a man fitting Daniel's description, a businessman opening new ventures under new names. Every whisper brought me closer, and every silence taught me patience. Revenge isn't about speed, it's about precision. During those years on the road, I became someone else. I studied people, the way they lie, the way they hide. I learned how to read silence like it was a language. I took jobs under different names: mechanic, driver, security. I watched how power moved through hands, how corruption dressed itself as opportunity. And slowly, I understood something. Daniel hadn't just stolen my family. He'd stolen the illusion that the world was fair. And once that illusion is gone, you see everything for what it really is. A game. A brutal, beautiful game of survival. I trained myself to play it. The old man's word stayed with me. They took your fire, didn't they? So I fed that fire. I let it burn away the weakness, the softness, the part of me that still begged for closure. Until all that was left was focus. I stopped being a victim. I became a hunter. Years passed. The pain dulled, but it never died. It became a companion, whispering, guiding, reminding. And then, one night, I found him. A news article. Entrepreneur Daniel Clay opens new tech firm in capital. A photo beside it. Same smug smile, same expensive suit. Alive, successful, untouched. While I'd been burning in silence, he'd been thriving in luxury. That night, I didn't sleep, not because of rage, but because of clarity. For the first time in years, I had direction. I moved to the capital under a new name, rented a small apartment in the shadows of the glass towers he called home. I began learning everything about him, his schedule, his habits, his routines, who he trusted, who he feared, who he loved. Because revenge isn't about destroying a man's body. It's about dismantling his world, piece by piece, the way he dismantled mine. I learned he had a company, a mistress, a secret investment account, and a reputation built on lies. All things I could touch, if I was careful. So I started close. The company. They were hiring a maintenance supervisor. The irony didn't escape me. Years ago, he'd built his empire on my hands. Now those same hands were walking back through his doors. The first time I saw him again, I felt nothing. Not rage, not grief. Just distance. He'd aged. Wrinkles behind the charm, shadows behind the smile. But arrogance, that stayed the same. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? He thought I was dead. Or worse, forgotten. And maybe I was. But ghosts have a way of finding their way home. Weeks turned into months. I kept my head down, learned everything about the business. I made friends, earned trust, disappeared into the background, invisible, reliable, ordinary. The kind of man no one notices until it's too late. Every night, I wrote in a notebook. Not plans, prophecies. Each page was a step closer to balance, because vengeance isn't chaos. It's order, waiting to be restored. I found out he'd partnered with a foreign investor, a deal that could make or break his empire. One signature, one slip, and everything he'd built would collapse. But it wasn't time yet. Vengeance, like fine whiskey, needs to age. In the meantime, I watched him. He smiled in meetings, toasted to success, shook hands with men who'd sell their souls for a number. And every time he laughed, I imagined my son's laughter fading beneath the crackle of fire. There were moments when I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I'd remember Emily's handwriting, the letters she never sent. One of them had survived the fire, half burned, the ink bleeding into ash. It said, "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll forgive." I used to read those words and break. Now I read them and build, because forgiveness is for the living. And I died the night they did. The transformation was complete. The man I'd been, husband, father, friend, was gone. What remained was something forged from pain and patience, something unstoppable. I began to whisper his downfall into motion. Slow, quiet, deliberate. Because true revenge doesn't shout. It whispers. It smiles. And when it finally strikes, it does so with the calm of inevitability. Daniel had taken everything from me. Now, it was my turn. And the beautiful thing about fire? It always finds its way back home. Revenge doesn't arrive like thunder. It creeps. Quiet, patient, disguised as chance. And by the time you hear it, it's already too late. For months, I lived inside Daniel's empire. A ghost in plain sight. The man he trusted to keep the engines running, the lights humming, the machines breathing. Every screw I turned, every cable I fixed, I did with one thought. That one day, the same system he built would bury him. He had no idea how close I stood. He passed by me in hallways, brushed my shoulder, nodded politely. Sometimes I wondered if he ever felt it, that cold wind of recognition that runs through the spine when the past stares from the shadows. But no, Daniel lived in a world where consequences were myths and people were disposable. He believed the dead stayed buried. I waited until I understood his world better than he did. Every file, every secret, every flaw. His company's success hinged on one upcoming deal, a merger with an international firm that would triple his fortune. He'd staked everything on it. Loans, investors, promises. If it failed, everything would collapse. All I had to do was tilt one domino. I began with small things, quiet manipulations that looked like coincidence. A corrupted server file, a delayed shipment, a rumor planted at the right moment. Each one ate at his empire from within. He started losing sleep, started snapping at his staff. The cracks began to show, but I wasn't after his business alone. That would have been too easy. I wanted his peace, his certainty, the feeling he once took from me, that the world was safe, predictable, his. So I found the one person he loved, Claire. His mistress, the woman who thought she was his secret. In truth, she was his weakness. I didn't seduce her. I didn't have to. I simply listened. Loneliness does the rest. Over coffee, she told me everything. His passwords, his insecurities, his guilt. Guilt. The one thing I thought he didn't have. She told me about the night of the fire. How he'd come to her hours before, trembling, drunk, muttering about a mistake. How he'd left suddenly, returned later smelling of smoke. How he'd cried, not out of remorse, but fear. Fear of being caught. That was the moment everything aligned. The confirmation I'd waited years for. The proof that my family's deaths weren't random. They were collateral damage. He'd burned my house to hide the evidence of embezzlement. And when he realized what he'd done, he ran. The truth didn't soothe me. It sharpened me. I used Claire's trust to access his private files, his offshore accounts, his falsified records, enough to destroy him 100 times over. But still, I waited. Because revenge isn't about speed. It's about poetry. I wanted him to watch it all unravel, to feel the dread rise inch by inch until it drowned him. It began on a Tuesday. His investors pulled out without warning. By Wednesday, the bank froze his accounts. By Friday, his partners were under investigation for fraud. His empire, the one he built from my ashes, crumbled into dust. I watched it happen quietly, from the same seat where I'd once watched him celebrate his victories. And for the first time, he looked small, not powerful, not untouchable, just a man, terrified, broken, hunted by something he couldn't see. A week later, he came to the workshop late at night, where I was pretending to work. He looked pale, hollow. He didn't recognize me. Not yet. He begged for help, said someone was after him, said he'd lost everything. I almost laughed. The irony was exquisite. I offered him a drink. Whiskey, his favorite, the same brand he'd brought to my house the night before the fire. He drank it without question. And I watched the flames return to his eyes, not from alcohol, but memory. "Do I know you?" he asked. The first spark of recognition flickered in his gaze. I didn't answer. I just smiled. It's strange. You imagine revenge as an explosion, a loud, cathartic end. But when it finally arrives, it's quiet, almost gentle. He started trembling, realizing too late what stood before him. Not a man, but the ghost of one. The silence between us was heavier than the fire ever was. Then I told him the truth. Every detail, every lie he told, every life he ruined, every night I spent feeding the fire he left behind. And when I finished, he didn't beg. He simply broke, like a machine that had run too long without oil. I didn't kill him. No. That would have been mercy. Instead, I left him with everything he feared most, the truth. The police would find the files, the accounts, the bribes, all neatly packaged, anonymous. By morning, his name would be a curse. His company, his wealth, his reputation, gone. And he'd know exactly who had done it. When I walked out that night, the city was quiet. The same kind of quiet that comes after a storm. The kind that feels like justice. But justice is an illusion. Because when I reached my apartment, and the adrenaline faded, there was nothing left inside me. No triumph. No peace. Just a silence deeper than ever before. I'd thought revenge would fill the hole they left. Instead, it showed me how vast it really was. Still, as I stared out the window, I saw something flicker in the distance. The faint orange glow of streetlights against the fog. For a moment, it looked like fire. And I realized something. Fire doesn't ask why. It doesn't grieve. It just burns. And maybe that's all I was ever meant to do. They say vengeance brings peace, but I think the people who say that have never truly lost anything worth avenging. Peace isn't what comes after revenge. Silence is. And silence can be far crueler. It's been 3 months since Daniel Clay's empire fell. The news called it the Great Collapse. Corruption, fraud, extortion. Every secret he buried clawed its way into the light. His face was everywhere. On every screen, every headline, every whisper. They said he fled the city. Some said he was arrested. Others said he took his own life. I didn't look for him. Because I didn't need to. I'd already buried him long before the world did. The day after it all ended, I woke up before dawn. For the first time in years, there were no plans to make, no steps to follow, no ghosts to chase, just quiet. The kind that feels too heavy to breathe in. I went back to what was left of the old house, the place where it all began, where it all ended. The town had changed. New buildings, new faces, new stories written over mine. But the soil remembered. Ashes don't forget. The house was gone, replaced by a small park. Children played where my son once had. Laughter echoed where screams once lived. It was strange, how life could bloom on a grave, how beauty could grow out of ruin. I sat on a bench, the morning light spilling through the trees, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion, a deep, ancient kind that no sleep could cure. I took out Emily's half-burned letter, the one I'd carried all these years. The edges were brittle now, the words almost gone, but I didn't need to read them anymore. I knew them by heart. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll forgive. Forgive. Such a small word, and yet it weighed more than the entire world. I whispered into the wind. I tried, Emily, but forgiveness doesn't grow in fire. The wind didn't answer, but for a moment, I thought I heard her laughter again. Soft, distant, like it was coming from another life. Maybe it was. As I sat there, I realized the strangest thing. The man I'd become, the one forged from pain and revenge, no longer had a reason to exist. Daniel was gone. Justice, if that's what you'd call it, was done. And what remained was a man shaped by a mission that no longer had meaning. I looked at my hands, scarred, old, unfamiliar. Hands that once built, then destroyed, and now trembled because they had nothing left to hold. That night, I returned to the city. The streets were alive again, indifferent, relentless. I walked among the crowds, invisible, just another face in a sea of strangers. But I felt something shifting inside me, a question that refused to die. What comes after vengeance? What does a man become when his purpose ends? I went back to the old gas station, the one where I'd met the old man all those years ago. It was abandoned now. Rust ate through the sign. Weeds split the concrete. But when I stepped onto that cracked ground, it felt like coming full circle. The memory of his voice echoed in my mind. They took your fire, didn't they? Back then, I'd thought those words were a gift, a call to awaken, to fight, to reclaim. Now, standing there, I realized they were also a curse. Because fire doesn't just burn what you hate, it burns everything, even what little good was left inside you. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I wasn't looking for justice or ghosts. I was just looking for a way to live with the ashes. I lit a match and watched the flame tremble, small, fragile, alive. Then I let it die between my fingers. And in that moment, I understood. The fire wasn't meant to last forever. It had done its work. It had consumed everything it needed to. Now it was time to let the smoke rise and disappear. I walked away from that place and didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some stories end in flames. Mine ended in quiet. But sometimes, late at night, when the city sleeps and the world feels too still, I still hear them. Emily's voice, Liam's laughter, like echoes caught in the walls of my memory. They don't haunt me anymore. They remind me that once, before all the ruin, I was capable of love. And maybe that's what keeps me human. The papers still talk about Daniel Clay, about how greed destroyed him. They call it a tragedy. They never mention the man who burned quietly in the background. And that's fine. Because vengeance isn't meant to be remembered. It's meant to disappear. Like smoke. Like a name carved in ash. If I've learned anything, it's this. Pain doesn't vanish when you avenge it. It changes shape. It becomes silence. And you learn to live inside that silence like it's home. I don't know what comes next. Maybe I'll build again. Maybe I won't. Maybe some fires aren't meant to reignite. Maybe they're meant to teach us how to live in the dark. The old man was right. They took my fire. But they also gave me something else. The truth that every man must face the world alone in the end, standing in the ruins of what he's made, deciding what kind of flame he wants to be. Some burn to destroy. Some burn to survive. And some burn just to remember what warmth once felt like. So if you ever see a man walking alone at dawn, eyes empty but calm, know that he's not lost. He's just someone who learned what I did. That vengeance isn't freedom. It's just another kind of chain. And in the end, it doesn't set you free. It just gives your pain a name.